Part 63. She Always Loves to Sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 637. Chapter 622, Get Bullets. He Yao once suspected that Chi Saijin had lost his mind because the people of Kameng had used excessive torture. The corner of Chi Saijin's mouth twitched and he rolled his eyes at her, his eyes constantly signaling. "Idiot, don't you think the atmosphere is wrong?" It was only then that He Yao realized that something was wrong. Her eyebrows twitched, and her gaze passed over Chi Saijin and fell on the other people not far away. She suddenly said, "What a coincidence, everyone is here now." She laughed dryly. "Loss is really brave, aren't you afraid of us running away again? She and Chi Saijin are both here. If they work together, it is not impossible to escape. Chi Saijin, he's really not afraid." He Yao. "Chi Saijin, he injected me with Tai. Tai is a drug specially used to anesthetize people with superpowers, and the one used by Ross is the latest developed version, which is the most powerful." He Yao. She narrowed her eyes and her expression became cold. No wonder he dared to lock us together. It turns out he was confident. "What's wrong with your injury?" "Small injury, I was ambushed. Instead of worrying about this, I might as well think about how to get rid of Tai." "Do you think Tai can be solved just by explaining it?" Chi Mao Yi listened to the conversation between the two and couldn't help but be puzzled. "What is Tai?" Before Chi Saijin could explain, Mr. Chi said, "A kind of anesthetic drug, should only be used for people with superpowers." After saying that, he glanced at Chi Saijin with a very complicated look. "Chi Mao Yi, anesthetic? That shouldn't last long, right?" He Yao, "It's useless, Tai is aimed at the spiritual realm." As soon as these words came out, the air suddenly fell into silence. Now, even if the two old men no longer want to admit their suspicions, they have to face reality. That's right, if He Yao was not a superpower, how could he have protected Lim Wei and Chi Mao Yi from the clutches of the Kameng? From the moment she called Chi Saijin fourth brother, they had some kind of suspicion in their hearts, but they just avoided it and didn't want to think about it in detail. After a moment of silence, Mr. Chi finally couldn't help it. He looked at the two of them coldly and asked, "Ajin, what's going on with you and Yao Yetu?" He Yao's expression froze for a moment, and she quietly moved behind Chi Saijin, trying to block his sight. She had always maintained contact with the Chi family as Chi Anyun's child bride, and even occasionally stayed with the Chi family and lived with them for a long time. But now it was discovered that she had been deceiving and concealing it. This kind of embarrassment after being exposed, leaving her at a loss for what to do. Chi Saijin sighed. He had known that such a day would come, so he calmly introduced to Mr. Chi, "Grandpa, let me introduce you again. She is He Yao, my comrade in arms." He used the word comrade. Everyone was shocked for a moment. Mr. Chi's brows twitched and he looked at his grandson in disbelief. Some ridiculous speculations were like a flood that had opened up and got out of control. "Have you known her for a long time?" When?" Chi Saijin was silent for a moment and swallowed, "Since the year I was kidnapped." He coughed lightly again. "Actually, we grew up together." Mr. Chi's temples bulged. So, Yao Yetu's life experience. At this point, he had to doubt everything. Chi Saijin's expression also became subtle, and the atmosphere gradually became awkward. He sneered and said, "She is indeed Lu Qingrand's niece. We didn't expect it to be such a coincidence." No wonder the president's expression was so distorted when he was investigating their backgrounds, and there was also a subtle hint of pain. He only found out when he arranged for He Yao to return to the imperial capital. His reaction at that time was even worse than Zhong Cheng's. Mr. Chi caught the key word, "you." He paused and suddenly remembered that Chi Saijin had taken off his waistcoat in front of Los not long ago, and he fell into silence. Mr. Li sighed, Lao Chi, don't worry about this. The safety of the children is the most important thing. Mr. Chi smiled mockingly, to put it lightly, your grandson is not a superpower, yet he has been deceiving him for so many years. His heart couldn't help but clench when he thought of the dangers Chi Saijin would encounter over the years. Chi Saijin and He Yao were silent at the same time. It's so embarrassing. Grandson is not, but granddaughter is. He was also a tyrant who was so powerful and cruel that they did not dare to resist for more than 10 years. The two of them looked at each other and sighed at the same time in their hearts, but they tacitly agreed not to say it out loud. Forget it, saying it at this time has no other meaning than frightening, so they should just shut up for now. Chi Saijin thought helplessly. The next moment, he raised his eyes and met Chi Maoyi's surprised eyes, which sent a chill down his spine. What's wrong? Chi Maoyi's eyes wandered back and forth between him and He Yao, sighing, it's incredible. You two, you usually dress too much alike. No one noticed anything wrong at all. So far so good. There are many people who are better at acting than them. Chi Maoyi's eyes darkened, and her tone became a little dejected. I told you earlier, your usual appearance, is all just pretending. So bad, so disgusting, the behavior of a second-generation ancestor, it was all staged. This hateful guy, even if he didn't win an Oscar for his acting skills, I would be sorry. Chi Saijin. This tone is quite angry. He quickly explained, I have no choice but to do so, don't get me wrong, cough cough cough. As he spoke, he coughed violently again. He Yao couldn't bear to look at him. Okay, fourth brother, calm down. How dare you be so excited when you have Tai in your body, don't you want to live anymore? He couldn't keep calm when it came to Chi Maoyi's matter, which was really helpless. Chi Maoyi just wanted to scare him. Who knew he would be so excited? She quickly said, okay, I'm not angry, so don't be excited. Good. He Yao looked at the scene in front of her, looked down at the injury on her shoulder, and couldn't help but sigh. I was just chatting and completely forgot, the bullet was still stuck in my shoulder. The blood loss is getting faster and faster now. If this situation continues, she may die soon. However, as a member of the second supervision team, He Yao said that this was all trivial. Fourth brother, can you still use your powers now? Chi Saijin raised his eyebrows and looked at her as a question. He Yao curled her lips, gestured to her shoulder, and said casually, I want to take out the bullet. Everyone. You said you wanted to get the bullet without changing your face, are you serious? Chi Maoyi exclaimed, You. The bullet is still in your body. At that time, she thought the bullet had penetrated her body. Why are we talking about such an important thing now? She looked at Chi Saijin nervously. Chi Saijin replied calmly, I don't know, I can't do it right now. He raised his eyes, how long can I hold on? He Yao chuckled, to be honest, although the boss and the others are already here, I'm really not sure if I can see them one last time. Chi Saijin sighed, I understand, I'll give it a try. He slowly closed his eyes, held his breath and concentrated, trying to mobilize all the mental power in his body. However, due to the Tai that was spreading in his body, all those mental powers were almost destroyed and could not be formed. Gradually, a thin layer of sweat broke out on his forehead, his face became extremely ugly and bloodless, and his whole body was extremely weak. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand. Under the gaze of everyone, a golden glow slowly appeared in his palm, and then the golden glow stretched and stretched, finally forming the outline of a dagger. Chi Saijin suddenly opened his eyes, the golden light dissipated in an instant, and a dagger floated quietly above his palm. The next moment, the dagger flew out, landed in He Yao's hand and spun around. Chi Saijin breathed heavily and looked extremely pale, that's all we have for now. He Yao didn't mind at all. A dagger was enough. She raised her eyebrows at Chi Sijin and said thank you. Then she glanced at everyone, pondered for a moment, and walked to the corner alone with her back to everyone. In order to avoid scaring them, it is better to avoid this kind of thing as much as possible. Chi Maoyi frowned because of her actions. She wanted to get up and go to help, but was stopped by Chi Sijin. She can do it herself. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 638. Chapter 623 From the Council Guards. Chi Maoyi was still a little worried, but even though they are supernatural beings and are different from ordinary people, after all, He Yao is only 17 years old. It is really unimaginable that she can bear such pain. Furthermore, looking at Chi Sijin's calm look, he is obviously used to it. Did this happen to them often before? Chi Sijin no longer paid attention to her subtle changes. He seemed to be lost in thought. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Grandpa." "Mr. Chi, huh?" Chi Sijin raised her eyes and looked at him, her expression more serious than ever before. "The people from the association are already here, and we will be able to leave soon. Before that, I want to figure out one more thing." Mr. Chi instantly understood what he meant. "You want to know why the seed project turned into a human experiment as you know it?" He nodded. "Yes, the president has repeatedly warned us not to trace the experiments back then. I want to know why." Mr. Chi and Mr. Li looked at each other and remained silent at the same time. "I have a general understanding of this matter from the association's information bank, but the most critical part is not recorded at all." Mr. Chi sighed. "Of course, after all, it was a fault jointly committed by the association and the Kameng." Chi Sijin was startled. "What? Ajin, you know Los, what about his father?" "No. More than just knowing him, he will remember that madman even if he turns into ashes. Laron, Ross' biological father, was a famous medical doctor in the world at that time. He devoted his life to medical research. Apart from this field, he was completely indifferent to things outside this field, and he was like a monster. What a pity, this man is a lunatic." Since he was invited to participate in the research of the seed project, his interest seemed to be suddenly aroused, and he devoted all his energy to the experiment, and he did not hesitate to use all means to make the research successful. Although he was warned by his superiors for several extreme actions, it was of no avail. His persistence in the seed project had fallen into a morbid state of madness. In the end, it turned into their childhood nightmare. It was Laron who personally turned the seed project into a cruel and human experiment. How should I put it? People like Laron probably shouldn't have anything to do with the seed project at all. However, his airborne landing was an order jointly issued by the top leaders of both parties, and we can't resist, Mr. Chi said. Mr. Li snorted coldly. "I think it's because the senior officials dislike us for not being able to produce results and are impatient." After all, Laurent's accomplishments in this area at that time were indeed qualified to trample the elites of the 5 major families under his feet. Chi Sijin also remained silent. At that time, there were constant melees, and the casualties of both the League and the Association were very heavy. They were in urgent need of a large number of new superpowers. If at this time, the seed plan that they had put all their efforts into failed to have any effect, everyone would be anxious. So they found Lowland and wanted to borrow his ability to promote the seed plan. However, I did not expect that this would directly lead to the demise of the real seed project. When Laron first came here, he did his best research, but later on, his research direction gradually went off the track. What's this? Take a look, what is this? The research report placed on the experimental table was swept to the ground by someone. The man kept dancing on the spot as if he was crazy. The 2 or 3 researchers following him were all dumbfounded. PhD. Laurent stopped and looked at the data in his hand with fascination. His eyes reflected the perfect string of numbers, and his mind could no longer accommodate anything else. Ha 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 ha, that's interesting, that's so interesting. I am really surprised that there are non-human life forms in this world. Laurent's expression was even a little crazy. I'm right, superpowers and ordinary people, looking at these wonderful experimental data, makes him almost crazy with addiction. As long as he continues to study, he can discover deeper mysteries. Yes, he wants to study, he wants to study. Later, Laurent went crazy. Speaking of this, Mr. Chi couldn't help but shook his head and said with some emotion, he began to conduct prohibited live experiments privately. At first, he used animals as experimental subjects, and finally, he decided to focus on humans. Mr. Li continued, the Chalig was the first to discover his secret experiment, and they wanted to stop him. Unexpectedly, Laurent was already on guard, and even blood-bathed the top brass of the Chalig. What he relies on are his successful experimental subjects. They perfectly combine the characteristics of animals and the abilities of superpowers. They can be called the strongest fighting machines. They are not afraid of pain, tireless, and easier to control. They are like puppets without thought at the mercy of others. Chi Saijin closed her eyes and secretly digested the series of news. At this moment, a crisp sound suddenly came. The dagger that Chi Saijin had just condensed was thrown to the ground. Everyone's attention was instantly attracted. He Yao slowly stood up with her back to them, her right hand covering her injured shoulder, blood dripping from her fingers to the ground. She turned around, coughed twice, and said, "So, that's why the seed plan went bad." Mr. Li shook his head, "No, all the experiments conducted since then are not seed plans. To call those inhumane experimental studies seed projects simply tarnishes the name." Chi Saijin nodded clearly and whispered, "So that's it?" Fourth brother He Yao suddenly called him. I just discovered something interesting." Chi Saijin's eyes moved slightly and met her gaze. He Yao smiled softly at him, spread out her palms, and held a blood-stained bullet between her fingers. "This is printed with the number YNZLS 3824. Chi Saijin's pupils shrank suddenly and he stood up, startling the others. "What did you say?" "Only weapons that belong to the association will be printed with similar numbers, and different numbers represent different uses. This bullet comes from the gun of the council's team." He Yao smiled and closed her palms. The next second, bright red flames suddenly appeared. The bright and hot firelight reflected her cold pupils, and a fierce flame that devoured everything seemed to rise deep in her eyes. She opened her palms and saw that the original bullet had disappeared and was extinguished in the flames. It seems that the boss guessed it right. There is indeed some garbage in the association that needs to be dealt with properly. Chi Saijin also smiled briefly, with a cold expression. There is no doubt that he is really a little angry now. Even if the two old men, Chi Maoyi and others were kidnapped and locked up here by Los, they would not be as angry as he is now. Well, it needs to be well, clear and sorted out. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfei. Chapter 639. Chapter 624 Debate. On the other side, Li Ju led the second team to knock on the door, and the second team's wife, Qi Jingkai, also called all the first team over. It was impossible for Zhongqing not to know about the joint operation of the first team and the second team. Therefore, when Li Ju led everyone to kill everyone, it was no surprise that he received a casual thought from the president, Li Ziaju. "You dead girl. Do you think I can't control you if you have such a small number of people? How about your caution?" Li Ju hacked one person to death without changing her expression. A few traces of blood spattered on her face, adding an eerie look to her stunning face. She said calmly, "My grandpa is almost in danger of dying and he still can't be calm." Zhongqing. He was unable to refute it for the moment. Regarding the arrest of the two old men, the entire association's top management had been holding secret meetings for several days. As a result, these useless people could not come up with any solutions. Instead, they were so noisy that his head nearly exploded. I originally thought that since the vests between my junior and apprentice were almost gone, I would leave some space for them to explain clearly and discuss ways to save the two old masters. In the end, these two people couldn't think of any solution and just let others to do it. At this moment, he really felt like 10,000 alpacas were roaring by. My heart almost stopped beating because of them. Zhongqing suppressed the anger in his heart and forced out a smile. "Little ancestor, even if you wait a little longer, we will definitely come up with a solution." Li Ju sneered, relying on those from the council. Zhongqing. Although I agree with your analogy, I am really not happy. He held his forehead helplessly, feeling deeply that he was being eaten up by this apprentice, and there was nothing he could do to her. Finally, he had to say, "Forget it, is ACI by your side? I have something to do with him." Li Ju made a sound, broke a person's neck, shook off the blood on his hand, and threw the communicator to the man next to him. "Hey, the old man is looking for you." Qi Jinkai was back to back with her. Behind him was a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. At his feet lay countless mutilated corpses. They were surrounded by countless monsters and experimental subjects, staring at the two of them eagerly. These invisible humanoid monsters and experimental subjects who have lost their consciousness and become manipulated puppets are all the work of Los. After he re-established the Cha League, he perfectly inherited his father's legacy. From the notes he saved to save money, he found a way to mass-produce such humanoid weapons and put them into large-scale manufacturing. This secret was not even discovered by the association. Qi Jinkai took the communicator. Even though he was surrounded by the roars of monsters and the cruel sounds of killing, his expression remained as calm as ever. "Hello." The next second, the yelling coming from the communicator made him look slightly moved, and he couldn't help but move the communicator farther away. "Qi Jinkai. Xiaju is acting recklessly, so are you. Do you know how dangerous this is? And her body, hello. Hello. Depend on." Zhongqing slammed the communicator to the ground, looking furious. "How dare this brat hang up on me?" He sat back angrily and glanced at the people present who were still arguing endlessly with cold eyes. His tone was particularly impatient. "Have you come to the conclusion of the discussion?" "President, I still don't think this will work. Second, after the re-establishment of the Cha League, its leader has only heard of his name but not his person. We have too little information, and we cannot distinguish true from false information about the Cha League. It may not be beneficial to us to start a war at this time." "That's right, and in my opinion, it may not be time to break out and take action. If it doesn't work, we can negotiate," a director suggested. Zhongqing's face immediately darkened. "What did you say?" He slammed the table angrily and stood up, and finally couldn't help but curse. "Negotiating with the Kameng? What a dream! Unless I die." The director was so frightened by his reaction that he broke out in a cold sweat, his face full of panic and confusion. The other directors present had different expressions, but almost all of them didn't look good. Upon seeing this, Mia quickly said, "President, please calm down first." Zhongqing took a deep breath and recited several times silently in his heart, "Don't be angry. I'm an idiot. Xiaju is still waiting for me." Then he barely suppressed the anger in his heart. He paused and said coldly, "Where are the others? You guys, do you all think so?" The other directors looked at each other with hesitation on their faces. Suddenly, Chen Fu, the chairman of the council, spoke up, "President, what I said may be a bit harsh, but, people from the 5 major families once participated in the seed plan, and now they have been captured by the Chalig. The purpose of the Chalig is obviously, to be on the safe side. I think we'd better." He paused, and then spoke softly, "It is better to cut the grass and root out the problem to avoid future troubles." As soon as these words came out, everyone present could feel that Zhongqing's aura had changed, and a strong and oppressive feeling swept through their hearts, making them almost unable to breathe. Zhongqing was angry, really angry. He knew these guys were idiots, but he didn't expect them to be so stupid. It is true that intellectual disabilities occur every year, and there are particularly many of them this year. Oh. Chairman Chen means that he wants to silence the 5 major families. That's right. Now Zhongqing couldn't help it anymore. He picked up the coffee cup and threw it at his head. You. Chen Fu didn't expect that he would attack directly. He didn't dodge in a hurry, and the coffee cup hit his eyebrow bone, causing blood to flow instantly. His expression suddenly darkened. Zhongqing stood up and looked at him condescendingly. "Chen Fu, don't think that I don't know about those frivolous things like yours. Being silent in the past does not mean that I am stupid, but it is for the sake of your fathers. Otherwise, as for you, you guys have been kicked out a long time ago." He snorted coldly, slammed the door and left. The rest of the directors froze on the spot watching this scene, and they were silent. Chen Fu stood there with his head lowered, clenching his fists, and his whole body was shaking with anger. "Zhongqing. Let's see." Zhongqing returned to his office, pinched his brows with a headache, and asked Mia, who followed him in, "How is Xiaju doing there?" Mia closed the door smoothly and replied, "There is no news yet, but with God Q here, there shouldn't be any big problems." Zhongqing hummed, "Just now, Xiao Wu and Xiao Ba sent me a message, saying that they had successfully infiltrated the Chalig. Having them cooperate inside and outside makes me feel at ease. In this way, all members of the second team are present. The combined combat effectiveness of the second supervisory team is not just 1 + 1 = 2. But even so, they can't fight against the entire Chalig for too long," Zhongqing said solemnly. "What's more, the forces of the Chalig all over the world have been changing. If no action is taken, the situation may exceed beyond our expectations." Mia frowned. "Special administration bureaus in various places have been dispatched and can suppress it for a while. It can be suppressed for a while, but it cannot be suppressed for a lifetime." Zhongqing sighed helplessly and said, "Go and call Director Su and Mr. Ren. I have something to discuss with them." "Yes. The current situation can only be suppressed by him personally coming out. Damn it, why is it at this time? If it had been a little later, he might have been able to clean up the council, and he would have ended up in the current predicament of being attacked from both sides. He actually asked a group of juniors to fight against the enemy's main force." Zhongqing smiled to himself. Someone in the comment area was calling Master Ju, so I asked her to show her face. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 640. Chapter 625. Li Ju takes action. Kameng, base camp. The enemies around them were killing more and more, and they kept coming towards them, gradually forming a huge encirclement. Li Ju discovered their intention immediately. After taking care of the experimental subject closest to him, he said in a deep voice, "Back off." Everyone standing around her was stunned. Only the people in the second team immediately understood and immediately retreated 10 meters away, widening the distance between them. Bim Wu also brought Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qinggran with him. The two of them were extremely puzzled, but before they could ask, new enemies had already pounced on them. Their huge rodents-like beasts were covered with smelly blood. These monsters opened their mouths at them, trying to kill them. Everyone swallowed it. Lu Qingran and others had no choice but to face the enemy. While fighting, they looked for an opening and asked, "What's wrong?" Bimwe fired one shot, and the bullets were just used up. She skillfully changed the magazine, loaded the gun, and pulled the trigger. Her movements were smooth, without any panic. After hearing this, she replied, "It's nothing, the boss is going to open it up, stay away, avoid accidental injuries." Everyone. Subconsciously, they all looked at Li Ju and saw her standing there, taking off the supernatural bracelet on her wrist, and then snapped her fingers. In an instant, there was a faint purple stream of light flashing through the fingertips. Before they could see clearly, there was a loud bang above their heads. The originally clear sky was suddenly covered with dark clouds, revealing the pressure of an impending mountain rain. Everyone looked at the rolling black clouds on the horizon, and a sense of fear arose in their hearts. Qi Jinkai paused and glanced at Li Ju from a distance. His eyes darkened slightly, as if he had guessed something. He stared at Li Ju for 2 seconds and then looked away. There were several loud roars in my ears. Li Ju stood there quietly, with dark clouds gathering above her head. She raised her slender wrist, which was dazzlingly white in the darkness. The next moment, her hand moved slightly, and purple pythons shredded through the void with terrifying pressure and landed around everyone, slashing all the monsters and experimental subjects that were coming up. Purple lightning flashed continuously in the dense clouds for more than a minute before Li Ju finally put down his hand. When the charred black mist dissipated, there was no living thing around them except their own people. A vacuum zone appeared within a radius of tens of meters with Li Ju as the center. Bimwe, Ningfeng, and others did not panic at all in the face of the situation at hand. Instead, they skillfully scattered around to search for the fish that slipped through the net that had not been killed, and then shot them again. Ningfeng looked around and sighed, "Tisk, tisk, the boss is much stronger." Everyone. They looked numb. It turns out that the 9 gods in the association's legend turned out to be lightning power users. And looking at the lethality, it must be 3s. After all, which family of thunder-type superpowers is strong enough to control thunder? Suddenly, everyone only had these 2 words in their minds. It is indeed the 9 gods, and it is indeed not a human being. Because Li Ju opened a draw without saying a word, he caught the opponent off guard and tore a hole out of the encirclement of the Cha League's human sea tactics. Although everyone was shocked by Li Ju's power, they did not fail. The point of wisdom. Such a good opportunity, if you don't rush it now, when will you wait? Sir, no good, they broke through our siege. Sir, they are attacking in our direction. Sir, the new experimental subject can't resist it. Lin Yan was sitting in the command room, listening to the report from his subordinates with a gloomy expression, and cursed angrily, "Waste. They are all waste. If the other party can't stop so many people, what use do I need from you? What are you still doing? Are you waiting for someone to kill you? Release all the experimental subjects quickly, kill them." But sir, those cannot be fully controlled yet, and there will be problems. If I say release it, release it? Yes. The men left reluctantly. Lin Yan stared at the monitor with sinister eyes and gritted his teeth. "Li Ju, let's wait and see." End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 641. Chapter 626 Sneaking into the White Tower. The thunderclouds in the sky that were holding power dissipated quickly. Li Ju withdrew his mental power. Where no one noticed, there was a fleeting dark purple light in his eyes. She stood in the ruins, took a cursory glance, and said, "Split up." Clear. Everyone quickly dispersed in different directions as agreed before. In an instant, only Li Ju and Qi Jinkai were left. Qi Jinkai raised his feet, crossed the corpses on the ground, and came to Li Ju. His eyes were not surprised at her strength, but full of worry, is there no problem with using your superpower like this? Li Ju shook his head, no. Her mental power is indeed easy to lose control, but this level of exertion will not affect her at all. In short, she didn't do her best. If others see it again, they will definitely be shocked. Being so strong that it can directly trigger the thunder is not considered as exerting all one's strength. You can imagine how terrifying it will be when her powers are fully unleashed. Qi Jinkai sighed, you shouldn't have come. With her current state facing the Kamen, she would not have an advantage at all. On the contrary, it might aggravate her condition. If he had known this, he would have kept her at the base no matter what. But he also knew that if Li Ju insisted on doing this, he couldn't stop him. Li Ju smiled softly at him, you are here, right? God Q is protecting me. No matter what I do, there will be no problem, right? Qi Jinkai had no choice but to ask her, what's next? This means that she is allowed to do whatever she wants. Li Ju's eyes flashed and he turned his gaze forward. The next target is of course the White Tower. The base camp of the Cha League is very large, but there is only one core. Relying on the mountains and deep forests, the towering White Tower is perfectly hidden, blending into the darkness under the night. It is surrounded by mental shielding devices, and the tower is made of built with the strongest defensive materials. Whether it is with the naked eye or a detector, it seems to be a castle that does not exist. With the White Tower as the center, countless experimental towers and defensive towers were scattered around in a radial pattern, so that they could protect and support the White Tower immediately. Ji Yunchu and others pretended to attack the experimental towers closest to the White Tower, completely cut off the White Tower's retreat. How are you sure that the old man and the others are hidden in the White Tower? Qi Jinkai asked. Not sure, but... Li Ju narrowed his eyes, it's just my intuition. She always had a hunch that the other party's target was not only the two old men, but also, her. In any case, she made two preparations tonight. Even if she couldn't ensure everything, she still considered the worst outcome. Overall, it was not a loss. So, Master Qi, do you want to play something big with me? Li Ju held out towards Qi Jinkai, how about the two of us destroy the White Tower? Her eyes shone with cunning, like a cat with a bad belly. The latter felt a little moved in her heart, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly, I am willing to accompany you. The two looked at each other and smiled, and the next second, they disappeared in an instant. What's the situation? In the White Tower, the personnel who were detecting the enemy's situation in front suddenly widened their eyes and suspected that they were dazzled. Otherwise, how could two large living people disappear in an instant? What's wrong? Lin Yan sat up straight and asked with squinted eyes. The man swallowed his saliva and said, first, sir, they disappeared. Lin Yan's pupils shrank, he suddenly stepped forward and pushed him away, his eyes fixed on the monitor screen, and he quickly scanned every corner of the screen, but there was no trace of those two people. He slammed the table, it must be the supernatural bracelet. Find it for me. They are teleporting and cannot escape the cloudy sky. They are nearby. Send everyone to find it for me. He didn't believe it. How could two people turn upside down on the territory of their alliance? In this way, the experimental subjects originally sent out to fight back became tools for finding people, scattered throughout the Cha League to track the whereabouts of Li Ju and Qi Jinkai. At this moment, the two people appeared behind the White Tower, hiding from everyone's sight. The moment he used his supernatural bracelet, Qi Jinkai directly used his mental power to interfere with the entire White Tower's detection devices and internal network. God Q, known as one of the two gods of the association, is only stronger than Li Ju. Once the three's level mental power is released, if it is not controlled well, it may cause mass lethality, affecting people within the scope of action. An aggressive attack on the spiritual domain of a creature is likely to cause most people to lose their consciousness on the spot. However, Qi Jinkai's control of mental power has reached an advanced level, and his control of power is so precise that no one even noticed that he had done anything. Under the cover of the monitor screen, they successfully teleported to the back of the White Tower, the weakest point of defense. Li Ju squatted in the nearby grass and observed the situation, and then struck decisively, killing 2 experimental subjects. Compared with those half-animal experimental subjects, although these 2 were a little thinner, they were already pretty good. And the current situation does not allow them to be picky. After putting on their experimental clothes, Li Ju used his mental power to make slight adjustments to his appearance, so that to outsiders, they looked exactly the same as the 2 experimental subjects. And only people with far higher mental strength than them can see through this disguise. But does anyone in the Cha League have a mental strength of 3s or above? The answer is undoubtedly no. Let alone the entire Cha League, even if all the Cha League associations were added together, they would probably be the only 2 3s level superpowers. Thinking of this, Li Ju couldn't help but sigh, I think we are really a match made in heaven. Qi Jinkai chuckled and hummed in agreement. They are very compatible in every sense of the word. Without further ado, the 2 of them hid the body to ensure that it would not be discovered, and then sneaked into the White Tower together. This is not the first time they have done this kind of thing, but it is the first time they have cooperated, and they have shown a better understanding than any other pair. It didn't take long for Li Ju to successfully arrive underground. The main control room of the White Tower was also the core control area of the entire Cha League. Qi Jinkai watched Li Ju making small moves back and forth in the core area and asked, "What are you doing? Give them a little excitement. If there is a problem with the general control, the Cha League will fall into chaos." She is very much looking forward to the person behind the scenes jumping around. Soon, Li Ju only tinkered in the core area for a while and then said, "Okay, let's go." Qi Jinkai nodded and didn't ask what she did. He just followed her without saying a word. This made Li Ju feel strange. She asked, "Aren't you curious?" "It's up to you, I'm only responsible for protecting you. The rest is up to her to do as she likes." As expected, after hearing this sentence again, Li Ju's mood was visibly happy. That's right, in that case, it's better to make this mess bigger. Help. The rest of the plot was so difficult to write. I'm about to explode. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 642. Chapter 627. Baimwiu, are you the reincarnation of a crow? D3 area, outside the experimental tower. All the members of the Cha League who were guarding were eliminated, and corpses were lying on the ground. Baimwiu and others rushed directly into the tower with all their strength. It's really strange, why is there no one there? Lu Qingran looked around vigilantly, not daring to relax at all. There were obviously a large number of defenders outside the experimental tower, but there was no one inside. Something was really wrong, there must be a scam. Bai Yuxiu also agreed, and it doesn't look like there are any traces of someone having been there. Surrounded by cold instruments, they seemed to have entered a no-man's land. Baimwiu was walking at the front. Seeing that the 2 of them looked nervous, he stopped and explained to them kindly, "Don't worry, there is no ambush. This is the experimental tower, where the experimental subjects are kept." She didn't say it was okay, but when she said it, Lu Qingran became even more panicked. What? Experimental subject? Is it the same as the group of things outside? Wouldn't that be bad? There are only 3 of them, and the rest are all staying outside to be on guard. If there are a large number of experimental subjects in the tower, they will not be able to deal with them at all. Baimwiu's mouth twitched. "Brother, can you be smarter? If there really were experimental subjects here like those outside, we would have been attacked a long time ago. How could we get in? Most of the people locked up here are semi-finished products whose experiments have not been successful, or people who have just been captured and have not been transformed. Hearing her explanation, Bai Yuxiu pondered for a moment. If this is the case, we can't just sit idly by. He looked at Bai Muo with a serious expression. Xiao, do you know where these experimental subjects are being kept? Bai Muo's eyes wandered for a moment, and he coughed twice. Actually, after the Chalig was rebuilt, the structure of these experimental towers was also upgraded, so I don't know much about it. Then let's look for it. Good. The three of them continued forward and quickly searched the first floor. After confirming that no one was there, they went to the second floor. After searching for several levels with no results, Lu Qingran sighed, it's so boring. If you keep searching like this one level at a time, when will it be over? Why don't you use your mental strength to explore? Bai Muo, no, the walls here are made of special materials, which isolate spiritual power and cannot be detected. Lu Qingran choked up. Could it be that we can't even use superpowers here? Not to the point, but it will have an impact. He cursed in a low voice. What kind of idiots are the Kameng? Bai Muo said coldly, a bunch of self-righteous idiots. When mentioning the Shameng, her eyes were full of disgust and ridicule, and even more so, cold as if actual murderous intent. Thinking of what those people did, she wanted to kill them all immediately. Just when Bai Muo could hardly suppress the overwhelming anger in her heart, someone suddenly tapped her on the shoulder. She was stunned and turned around subconsciously, only to be touched on the top of her head. Bai Yuxiu smiled and said, brother, will you help you kill those idiots? Bai Muo was stunned for a moment, then smiled and nodded fiercely. Lu Qingran's desire for gossip suddenly started again, and her eyes flickered back and forth between Bai Muo and Bai Yuxiu. Speaking of which, Lao Bai, have you and Xiao spoken clearly? They have been brothers and sisters for more than 20 years, but they have always been in a scam, hiding each other and deceiving each other, but they have a family relationship that cannot be broken. At that time, the two of them fell off guard. He remembered that Bai Yuxiu was going crazy. Muyu's expression was also very bad. Why was it that it had only been a short time before, and it was as if nothing had happened? He looked at the unusually delicate atmosphere between the two, and suddenly remembered that the brother and sister seemed to have been alone for a while at the base. He suddenly narrowed his eyes and said, you two, could you have done something behind my back, something? Bai Muo and Bai Yuxiu looked at each other guiltily, and then quickly looked away. Bai Muo glared at Lu Qingran fiercely, and said angrily, why are you such a gossip? Lu Qingran swears based on his more than 20 years of experience with these two guys, there is definitely something wrong with them. Speak quickly, what happened to you two? Bai Yuxiu cleared his throat and said, no, I just started talking. I don't believe it. Lu Qingran snorted coldly, with a somewhat aggrieved tone, I also confessed to Ah Feng, and he still doesn't want to talk to me, so you must have something else that I don't know. Bai Yuxiu. Bai Muo, I think you should reflect on why Ah Feng doesn't want to talk to you. As long as this guy is reliable, Ning Feng will never dislike him to this extent. Speaking of this, Lu Qingran's whole body wilted, and he said dejectedly, I don't know why. He looked at Bai Muo aggrievedly and complained pitifully, he doesn't even want to be with me. Bai Muo. You deserve it. Lu Qingran, for the sake of our relationship for so many years, you two tell me how to reconcile. Otherwise, what will happen if my Ah Feng really runs away? Bai Muo rolled his eyes, it would be better to run away. Lu Qingran's expression suddenly turned resentful, Xiao, I have regarded you as my sister for so many years, so you can't hope that I can't, right? I have been chasing Ah Feng for so long, greeting him every day, and finally managed to catch him, but in the end he was about to run away. The more Lu Qingran thought about it, the sadder she became, and she wanted to cry on the spot. Bai Mui's blood pressure increased as she listened, and her fists suddenly became hard. She gritted her back molars and asked, "What do you mean by catching someone up, and dragging them to bed?" Lu Qingran from Mume. She hasn't even settled this debt with him yet, but he brought it up himself. Lu Qingran. His face suddenly turned as red as a ripe apple. He lowered his head and stared at the ground. He wanted to rush out of the 3 bedrooms and 1 living room with his toes on the spot. He stammered, he, 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 with his head, stared at the ground. He wanted to get out of the 3 bedrooms and 1 living room. He told you this. The relationship between the second team is also very good. Is it okay to talk about such secretive things? Grass. Bai Mu took a deep breath and couldn't bear to look directly at Lu Qingran, who was squatting in front of her with a blushing face. This time the fist is really hard. The next moment, she kicked someone in the butt. Lu Qingran was caught off guard and fell forward, gnawing on the mud like a dog. "Damn it, Lu Qingran, that's my brother, you bastard, I'm going to kill you. This shameless and dirty bastard. How old is Ah Feng? Not much older than he Yao. How could he actually do it? She will fight with him today." Fortunately, Bai Yuxiu held her back from behind, otherwise one of the 3 of them would have been splattered with blood today. Lu Qingran was stunned. "Isn't he your god brother?" He always thought that the compatibility between Ningfeng and Bai Mu was intentional, just to make him and Bai Yuxiu jealous. Whoever imagined it turned out to be true. But if this is the case, wouldn't he have another chance? Lu Qingran's eyes suddenly lit up, and at the risk of being killed by Bai Mu, he quickly hugged her thigh and shouted, "Xiao! Sister! Please! Help me!" Bai Mu's temples jumped sharply, and he resisted the urge to strangle him. "Get out!" Lu Qingran said shamelessly, "No. How about I call you sister, and you can say a nice word to Ah Feng for me?" Bai Mu was shocked by his shamelessness. "Lu Qingran, you really impress me. Do you still need some moral integrity? You don't have to do it for Ah Feng." She was speechless. Lu Qingran hugged her thigh tightly, glanced at Bai Yuxiu who was standing next to her, and frantically hinted for help. Bai Yuxiu's eyes twitched. Suddenly, I wanted to break up with him. But thinking about the current situation, he raised his hand and pinched his eyebrows, and said helplessly, "Lu Qingran, get up first, this is not a place for nonsense." "Bai Mu, that's right, get up. If something happens later, you will be the first to die." Lu Qingran sneered, obviously not believing it. However, the next moment, the 3 of them clearly heard a subtle sound breaking through the air. Bai Mu's eyes were sharp, and he raised his hand to block it. The ice pick hit the hidden needle, causing a small spark, and then penetrated deeply into the ground. Lu Qingran looked at the hidden needles. The tails of the needles were still trembling. If Bai Mu hadn't taken action, they would have all pierced his back. He suddenly said, "Bai Mu, are you the reincarnation of a crow?" End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 643. Chapter 628 Lao Wu and Lao Ba. Bai Mu ignored him and stared at the needles on the ground, which seemed more and more familiar to them. Suddenly, her eyes flashed. "Isn't this Ji Yunchu's hidden needle?" At this moment, a joking voice sounded, "Hey, there are actually people performing thigh hugging in this place." A sound suddenly came from the empty experimental tower. It was quite scary at first, but Baimwe felt it was very familiar. Before she could make a detailed analysis, she heard another person say, "Isn't it true? It's not shameful for an old man to hug a little girl's leg." Baimwe. She seemed to know who it was. Lu Qingran suddenly became anxious. He stood up from the ground, patted the ashes on his legs, and said angrily, "Who is it? They are so sneaky that they don't dare to show up, and they also carry out a sneak attack." "We are not making a sneak attack, we are just trying to warn you out of kindness." Lu Qingran was so angry that she jumped on her feet. "How could anyone remind me like this?" If Baimwe had taken action a moment later, the needle would have pricked his back. "Sir, I advise you to leave us alone and deal with the enemy." Lu Qingran frowned, immediately put away his smile, and looked around warily. "Where are the enemies?" "Welcome to the Kameng experimental tower. A large wave of experimental subjects is coming. The enemy has 10 seconds to reach the battlefield." Another joking voice sounded again. Lu Qingran. "Bai Yuxiu. Baimwe. Your sister. Is it true that you won't be beaten this way?" Although Baimwe was used to the Comer's flirtatious actions, he still couldn't help but sigh. Is this person a Death Star person? But the current situation no longer allows them to complain too much. Because they have also discovered that the people that are constantly surrounding them, are considered human experimental subjects. These experimental subjects were soaked in an unknown thick liquid, leaving obvious traces wherever they passed. Their faces were pale and lifeless, their eyes were dull as if they had absorbed souls, their limbs were stiff and uncoordinated, but they were extremely fast. Quickly approached the three of them. One of the experimental subjects sniffed, and the next second, he roared and rushed towards the three of them quickly, his fingers turning into sharp claws, as if he wanted to tear her into pieces. Baimwe reacted instantly. He grabbed his right hand in the air, and a sharp ice blade appeared out of thin air, exuding a biting cold air. The moment the ice blade appeared, she subconsciously held up a flexible sword flower. Her movements were very skillful and smooth. The next second, the ice blade pierced the chest of the experimental subject, and bright red blood spurted out instantly. The experimental body lost its vitality and fell to the ground. The others behind it seemed to smell danger and hesitated in place, daring not to move forward. Baimwe was holding the ice blade, the tip of the blade was still dripping with blood. She looked at them with cold eyes, showing murderous intent. Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qingran also took out their weapons immediately and aimed at the experimental subjects in front of them. The two sides were confronting each other, with no one making any move, and the atmosphere was tense to the extreme. Suddenly, an experimental subject looked up to the sky and roared, and the experimental subjects behind it responded as if following the leader, and then launched a full-scale attack on them. The three of them are all very powerful and experienced in many battles. It stands to reason that these experimental subjects are not their opponents at all, but during the fight, Baimwe suddenly realized that something was wrong. She raised the ice blade with one hand to block the opponent's claws, put the particle gun against its chest with the other hand, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Bang, another one solved. Lu Qingran raised her hand to wipe the blood spattered on her face, and wanted to turn around to help Baimwe, but when she saw her cutting people with an ice blade in one hand and shooting them with particles in the other, the corner of her mouth suddenly twitched. The combination of hot and cold weapons is really easy to use. Before he could finish complaining in his heart, Baimwe suddenly turned his gun and aimed it at him, twitching his fingers. As the gunfire rang out, the bullet cut through the air and passed by his ear, and then entered the temple of the sneak attacker behind him. "Are you distracted at this time?" Baimwe scolded him coldly. Lu Qingran suddenly realized what a stupid mistake he had made. He immediately laughed at himself and turned around to continue fighting. He was just a little shocked. Even though he knew that Baimwe was a superpower in the second team, He always had a fixed impression of her and felt that she was a sister who needed protection. However, this exciting scene immediately gave him a big impact, making him realize that she had always been strong and did not need their protection. The three of them quickly dealt with the enemy, but soon, Lu Qingran and Bai Yuxiu also discovered the problem like Bai Muiyu. These experimental subjects are rushing forward like painless and tireless machines. No matter how strong they will still be unable to withstand it. Lu Qingran couldn't help but cursed, "What's going on? Are they machines?" He watched helplessly as an experimental subject had his arm broken, but immediately jumped on him again as if he felt no pain, and continued until he was completely dead. Bai Mui's expression became more and more solemn. "Something's wrong, they must be under control." The biggest difference between these experimental subjects and the experimental subjects outside is that they are puppets that are manipulated. Whether it is consciousness or actions, there are people behind the scenes who direct and decide. They are basically puppets. Bai Yuxiu broke the neck of an experimental subject and said solemnly, "Do you feel that their strength is gradually getting stronger? When they first started killing, they had no effort, but now it takes longer and longer to kill an experimental subject. Even if their physical strength is exhausted, there will not be such an obvious gap." That's right. Lu Qingran dealt with the enemies in front of him with a cold face, looking particularly ugly. To be on the safe side, Bai Yuxiu suggested, "Let's retreat first. Something is wrong here." Unexpectedly, Bai Muiyu said, "No need." She withdrew from the battle circle, looked somewhere, and said through gritted teeth, "Is it nice to watch the show next to you? Why don't you help me?" Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qingran were stunned at the same time. Besides them and the experimental subjects, who else is here? The next moment, a sound like a sharp blade cutting through the air suddenly sounded, and two white lights struck from behind them, falling on the group of experimental subjects, and immediately wiped out a large area. Bai Yuxiu's eyes flashed with surprise. His strength was no less than theirs. He looked back and saw two figures falling from the sky and appearing in front of them very suddenly. One of them raised his hand and said hello politely, "Hello, good evening everyone." That's all. He also whistled very softly. "Bai Yuxiu." "Lu Qingran." Bai Muiyu slashed at him with his sword without hesitation, but the latter nimbly dodged it. "Shen Lu. Can you be more serious?" she shouted unbearably. "Hey, Sixth, it's been so long since we last met, so there's no need to be so excited when we meet, right?" Shen Lu winked at her with his beautiful peach blossom eyes. He was charming and handsome, making people particularly fond of her. If the current situation is ignored. Seeing that Bai Muiyu wanted to kill him with a sword, the man next to Shen Lu finally couldn't help but stop his next words. "Okay, Lao Wu, if you keep talking, she will stab you into a sieve." Shen slightly curled his lips and became quiet. Fang Yang held his head against his head and looked at Bai Muiyu with an apologetic tone. "I'm sorry, Lao Lu, I didn't control him." Bai Muiyu was so angry with Shen Lu that he almost had a heart attack, but when he saw Fang Yang, most of the anger in his heart immediately subsided, and his face became much better. "It's okay, Beige, I know what he is like. Tian is so good at death that one can't help but sincerely believe that the reason why he rarely returns to the base while on missions is because he offends Li Ju by seeking death, and he hides outside because he is afraid of being torn into pieces by her. By the way, Fang Yang, the most honest among them, was kidnapped." Bai Muiyu raised his heels and figured out that these experimental subjects were most likely the result of Shen Lu's work. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 644. Chapter 629 or Shut Up Forever. Shen Lu is a man who is particularly good at making waves. When they were captured and used as experimental subjects more than 10 years ago, he dared to cause some trouble for the people of Kameng in full view of the public. You can imagine how courageous he is. After being rescued by Zhongqing and returned to the association, his nature was completely liberated. Not long after, the entire association was brutally murdered by him. The second team has not had a good reputation since its establishment, and most of the reasons are due to him. For a period of time, Li Ju was in seclusion due to a serious injury. Ji Yunchu also devoted himself to developing medicine for her. The rest of the people were all busy doing tasks and had no time to manage the affairs of the base. Therefore, Shen Lu saw the opportunity and led the newcomer in the base offended the entire association, and the relationship with the first team and the Silver Moon Guards of the council was also forged at that time. Later, when Li Ju came out of seclusion, Shen Lu knew that he would not get any good results according to her temper, so he slipped away very carefully. Since then, he has not been seen again. He only occasionally sent letters to express that he was still alive, until Li Ju, after his anger completely subsided, he ran back dejectedly. But it didn't take long before he couldn't control himself and caused trouble everywhere, causing a mess in the association. Everyone complained to their second team. Li Ju couldn't bear it anymore. This time, he kicked Shen Lu out and ordered him not to return to the base unless he had nothing to do. There are so many people out there that no one cares. He said he didn't care, but in case he really caused more trouble, someone had to be sent to watch him, so Fang Yang volunteered to go. On the one hand, he is the most idle one in the team because he is not very strong and usually takes few tasks. He just has time to watch Shen Lu. On the other hand, he also wants to go out and see the world and practice himself. So the two people left the association for several years. In the past few years, they have kept in touch with them. It was not surprising to know the current situation of the second team. What made her strange was, why did these two people appear here? No matter how well informed the news is, it is impossible to reach the Shemeng ahead of them, right? Baimweo looked at them with confusion in his eyes. Why are you here? Shen Lekong pursed his lips at the experimental subject in front of him and said, well, it's because of them. What's the meaning? Baimweo's eyes paused, and some suspicion in her heart was suddenly amplified. She glanced at Bai Yuxiu, who immediately understood and directly released a supernatural barrier, covering them and isolating the attacks of the experimental subjects. The experimental subjects were isolated from the outside and kept slapping the barrier with their hands. However, the moment they touched it, it was like receiving an electric shock. They immediately retracted their hands, roared unwillingly, and stared at them eagerly. Baimweo turned around and said, there's something wrong with these experimental subjects, right? Although is a question, it has an affirmative tone. The two of them appeared here at this time, which just verified her conjecture. Fang Yang nodded. He had something to say, but he hesitated and glanced at Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qinggran vaguely. Baimweo saw what he meant and introduced him. Lao Ba, this is a team of Q God's men. She pointed first at Bai Yuxiu and then at Lu Qinggran, my brother, my friend. Shen Lu. Fang Yang. The expressions of both of them were shocked and confused. Shen Lu felt that he might be in a dream. What did you say? A team? Q God. Your brother? Friend. Baimweo has not seen you for so long and your language organization skills have problems. These phrases are fine when taken individually, but when combined together, he can't understand them at all. Is it possible that he has been away from the team for too long and the world has changed drastically? Can a team be friends with them? No, a team can actually breathe the same air as them. Shen Lu looked at Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qinggran with his eyes widened. A team. The two nodded. He instantly looked like his worldview had been reshaped. It's incredible, you can actually let us live in peace for more than 3 seconds. Everyone. Baimweo clenched his fists loudly, gritted his teeth and wanted to kill him. Who is all this because of? If he hadn't planned to die to provoke the first team, would they have become more and more estranged from the first team? It ended in embarrassment in the end. Can't you blame me entirely? At that time, a team was really beaten up. After grabbing some good things, they went everywhere. Idiots know that wealth should not be exposed. Didn't they deliberately provoke people to steal? Shen Lu said. Everyone. So you went to a group of base warehouses in the middle of the night and moved everything in their warehouses without leaving even a hair behind? It was just a matter of stealing the key, and he shamelessly wrote at the crime scene, "The first team is not good at this, it can't catch up with the rookies who are at the bottom of the second team." This kind of self-reporting sentence will make anyone vomit blood. Who would be able to bear this? Lu Qingran and Bai Yuxiu's expressions turned dark when they mentioned the dark history that they couldn't bear to look back on. Especially after they found out that the person in front of them was the culprit who had caused them to lose face many years ago, they couldn't calm down even more. Bai Muiu was worried that if Shen Lu continued to speak, blood would be spilled on the scene today, so he immediately stepped forward and took Bai Yuxiu's arm, and said with a dry smile, "Brother, calm down." The veins on Bai Yuxiu's forehead were throbbing, but he couldn't have an attack in front of his sister, so he closed his eyes and endured it. "It's okay." Lu Qingran smiled but said, "I know, the overall situation is more important." He understood. What a ghost. This man is too arrogant. You dare to say this in front of them? Do you really think they can't kill him? If your sister hadn't had the third brother and their main team members away, how would it be this little brat's turn to run wild in their base? Following Bai Muiu, Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qingran also clenched their fists and glared at Shen Lu while grinding their molars. Someone didn't care and wanted to continue talking, but was stopped by Fang Yang and stopped the topic. "Stop talking about this, let's talk about business." Since Bai Muiu said that these two people are friends, it means that they are trustworthy, so there is nothing to hide. "Do you still remember that the boss discovered traces of strange stones at the Imperial Capital auction some time ago?" Bai Muiu nodded. "This matter was not over at that time. The boss felt that something was fishy, so he secretly handed it over to me and Xiao to investigate. But too many things happened immediately after that, and the progress of the investigation was temporarily shelved. Not long ago, a murder case of a person with supernatural powers occurred in the imperial capital. They vaguely caught a clue, so they followed the clues to investigate. As more and more information was found, they gradually pieced together a shocking truth." "Bai Muiu, what did you find?" For the first time, Shen Lu regained his careless expression and said seriously, "There are people in the council who are colluding with the Cha League." The expressions of everyone present changed. Bai Muiu narrowed his eyes and asked, "Are you sure?" "They have also speculated about this matter, but there has been no evidence." "Sure." Fang Yang said, "After the boss handed over the case of the strange stone to us, Xiao and I started investigating the suspicious people who had come into contact with the auction, and finally found that the source was in the association. Shen Lu, I was surprised at the time that no one would come into contact with this kind of strange stone easily except for the president. I racked my brains and thought about it, and later I found out, oh, it turns out that the old immortals on the council can also do it. This is causing trouble, especially in recent years when the president rarely interferes with the association's affairs due to his special abilities, so the board of directors tries to cover up the situation with one hand." Fang Yang agreed with him. "With this guess, we quickly found evidence that people from the council smuggled exotic stones. This is not a trivial matter. After reporting it to the boss and president, we still felt uneasy and did it on our own. I suggest you check it out." Shen slightly clicked his tongue and glanced at him. "Old man, stop pretending at this time. What's wrong with you? You can't help but be curious, ouch." He grinned and rubbed his calf, glared at Bai Muiu angrily, and accused, "What are you doing?" Bai Muiu raised the ice blade, and the tip of the blade shone with a frightening cold light, almost blinding him. She warned with a smile, "Shut up, or shut up forever, choose one." Shen Lu. Shen Lu was immediately attentive. Can't you afford to be cowardly if you can't offend him? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 645. Chapter 630. Things are getting serious. Fang Yang sighed, seemingly helpless, but did not waste time and continued. The council smuggled out the strange stones and disguised them as auction items and flowed them into major auctions. The designated buyers will then take the pictures of these strange stones, so that no one is aware of it. During the investigation, we found that these buyers are all related to the shaman. Baimweo frowned and remembered something. At that time, the boss also asked me to check on a man named Lin Yan. He was also from the shaman. Speaking of Lin Yan, Bai Yuxiu also remembered something and glanced at her without trace. He remembered that she had just returned from abroad, but suddenly she wanted to go to Lin City to film some movie. She also had an affair with Lin Yan. It turned out that it was for investigation. Fang Yang took a deep breath. That's right, and his position is not low. Baimweo sneered. It's really him. She has been lurking in the empire for such a long time, and her acting has deceived her into a major. Then what? Why does the Cha League need so many exotic stones? It doesn't take so many to cultivate superpowers, right? Lu Qingran asked. They are not cultivating superpowers, but cultivating experimental subjects. Lu Qingran was stunned and pointed at the experimental subjects isolated outside the barrier. Are they them? Right. Lu Qingran raised his eyebrows, walked closer to observe these experimental subjects, and said in surprise, but they don't look very powerful. Because they are failures. Baimweo's pupils shrank suddenly, and she raised her eyes to look at him in disbelief. Fang Yang nodded, yes, it's what you think. Bai Yuxiu couldn't understand their confusion and asked, what is a failure? The air suddenly became quiet for a moment. Baimweo's expression became ugly, and Shen Lu and Fang Yang also fell silent, which made them even more curious. After a long time, Baimweo explained in a hoarse voice, the failed products will be made into human bombs in this way. Those smuggled exotic stones are most likely used to make human bombs. They put the exotic stones on, all the energy is drawn out and introduced into the failed products, using them as containers to carry the overloaded mental power. Once triggered, they will explode immediately. What? She raised her head, her eyes were scarlet, and her tone seemed to be frozen. Once these suicide bombs explode, their power will not be inferior to that of an S-class superpower who explodes himself. The expressions of Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qingran were blank for a moment. They were frozen in place, their minds sluggish and unable to turn around, as if a string had been broken. You heard that right? An S-level superpower self-destructs and can reduce the entire Sha Alliance base camp to rubble in minutes. And here, in just one experimental tower, there are hundreds of failed products according to visual inspection. If it explodes. Damn. The Kameng are crazy, Lu Qingran couldn't help but cursed, so many. Enough to destroy the earth. What on earth do they want to do? Bai Yuxiu pondered, can't we kill all these failures? Baimweo shook his head, it's useless. As long as their corpses are still there, they can explode at any time. Unless they destroy the corpses, destroying the corpses is also dangerous, and there are so many failed products. Even destroying the corpses will take a long time, which is enough for the Alliance. Found and detonated them. Grass. The worst thing is not just this. Fang Yang, not only that, there are also a large number of failed products imprisoned in other experimental towers, the number is only a lot more. At this time, everyone lost their voice. Finished. Things are getting serious. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 646. Chapter 631 Explosion. After realizing the seriousness of the matter, everyone became serious and stood there deep in thought. After a while, Baimweo suddenly suggested, "Let's leave here first and then talk." Bai Yuxiu also agreed, "Well, let's make peace with the others first. Then what to do with these experimental subjects?" Lu Qingran looked at the experimental subjects surrounding them, with a flash of irritation in his eyes. "These are big troubles. Fang Yang, if they are trapped, they must not be released. Although it is more dangerous to gather together, if they are scattered in various places, they will change from suicide bombs to time bombs, and they will be even more uncontrollable. The lesser of two evils." Others agree. Bai Yuxiu immediately removed the barrier, and the experimental subjects that were not blocked instantly rushed up. The 5 of them worked together, and in a short time they were tightly and thrown together. Shen Lu clapped his hands and said, "Let's go." Several people came out of the experimental tower. Before they could decide which area to go to first, they heard a loud noise and the ground seemed to shake 3 times. They looked up and saw billowing smoke rising not far away covering the sky. Someone stumbled over and said in a panic, "Team leader, it's bad." The experimental tower in Area T2 exploded for some reason. Everyone's pupils shrank at the same time. No, the experimental subject was detonated. Baimweo reacted suddenly and secretly said, "Where are 7th Sister and Ah Feng? Have they been discovered?" Lu Qingran was stunned for a second, and the next moment, he ran towards T2, his body quickly turned into a bolt of lightning. "Ah Feng is there." Baimweo also ran away after him and cursed for the first time. Others did not react as quickly as them, but they also caught up as quickly as possible. T2 area, experimental tower. Most of the tower body had been destroyed by the explosion just now, and all internal systems were damaged. Fortunately, Ji Yunchu and others responded quickly and evacuated the experimental tower immediately. The casualties were not very serious. Despite this, Ji Yunchu, the leader He Ningfen, was still proud of himself. When Baimweo and others arrived, they saw Ji Yunchu standing there covering his arm with a gloomy expression. Ningfen was leaning on her shoulder, his face was pale, many wounds on his body were still bleeding, and he was completely unconscious. Past. Lu Qingran ran all the way and almost stopped at this moment. His legs went weak for a moment and he almost fell to the ground. He stared blankly at Ningfen with his eyes closed, and his voice was hoarse and unbelievable, "Ah Feng." He rushed forward quickly, his hands were trembling, he didn't dare to touch him, and his face was bloodless. What's wrong with him?" Ji Yunchu coughed twice, his voice stained with blood, "Still alive." Lu Qingran's shoulders were relaxed, but his expression was still tense. He carefully took Ningfen over, feeling a little overwhelmed and panicked with every move. He lowered his gaze and looked at the unconscious Ningfen. He was going crazy, and his tone was heart-wrenching, "Ah Feng, don't scare me." Baimweo's face was also very ugly. She looked at Ji Yunchu, "7th Sister, what's going on?" Ji Yunchu held his dislocated and bleeding arm and clicked his tongue, "I didn't pay attention. I missed it." She looked at Ningfen, who was lying in Lu Qingran's arms, and sighed, "If Xiao Shi hadn't reacted quickly and used space to block the self-destruction of the experimental subject immediately, I'm afraid we would all be dead." Ningfen is a rare space superpower, and his strength is not low. Just at the moment when the experimental subjects were about to self-destruct, he moved faster than his brain, quickly opened the alien space, enveloped all the experimental subjects, and then saved everyone. Even so, the 2 of them were closest to the center of the explosion, and the self-destruction of the experimental body was too powerful, so they were more affected. Ningfen fainted directly due to overdraft of mental power. Ji Yunchu moved, and Len Buting touched the wound. The severe pain caused her to curse, These insidious bastards. She and Ning Feng apparently also discovered the abnormality of the experimental subjects. The difference was that they were discovered by the people behind the scenes. Lu Qingran hugged Ning Feng, her eyes were red with anxiety, and shouted, "Stop talking. Think of a way to save Ah Feng." Bai Muyu immediately looked at Ji Yunchu, "Seventh sister, you." Before she could finish speaking, Ji Yunchu frowned and waved to her, "Come here and help me, I can't move my legs." Bai Muyu quickly helped her to Lu Qingran's side. Ji Yunchu looked at him condescendingly, "Get out of the way first to block the light." Lu Qingran subconsciously followed the instructions. Just when he was confused, the next scene made him suddenly dilate his pupils. Ji Yunchu stretched out his hand, and a bright light cyan light condensed in his palm, instantly covering Ning Feng. Then, wherever the light cyan light passed by, the wound healed rapidly until it was intact as before. Bai Yuxiu looked on and blurted out, "A person with healing powers." The look in his eyes when he looked at Ji Yunchu was not as simple as shock, it could be called horror. If ranked in terms of rarity, the space department is ranked in the dozen or so at most, while the healing department ranks first, without any suspense. It is a very lucky chance that there is one healing power user among 100 power users. Among the thousands of power users in the entire association, there are no more than 10 healing power users. And Ji Yunchu is. The healing power is very special. It can instantly heal wounds, but it cannot bring the dead back to life. People with powers have no ability to attack, and they cannot use powers to heal themselves. Therefore, among the group of people with powers, they are considered national treasures. The presence. Logically speaking, if there is a healing element among the team members, they must be carefully protected in every possible way. How can they be allowed to go out to perform tasks? And it's a life-threatening task. At this moment, Bai Yuxiu was a little curious about the brain circuits of Li Ju and the people in the second team. Ji Yunchu's speed was very fast. Within a few minutes, all the large and small wounds on Ning Feng's body had disappeared. Except for some clues from the torn clothes and dried blood stains on the clothes, there was no sign that he had been injured at all. This kind of healing speed is probably the strongest among the healing systems he has ever seen. Bai Yuxiu cursed secretly. Ji Yunchu was so focused on saving Ning Feng that he had no time to pay attention to his inner thoughts. After the last wound was healed, Ji Yunchu withdrew his superpower and took a step back. If Bai Muyu hadn't caught her shaky body behind her, she might have fallen to the ground. Ji Yunchu wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, "It's really hard." If she hadn't been injured too, she wouldn't have been able to hold on even after using so little mental energy. Bai Muyu looked at her worriedly, "Seventh sister, your injury." She could feel that Ji Yunchu's body was shaking uncontrollably, and one could imagine how badly he was hurt. But those with healing powers cannot heal themselves. So even the ghost doctor can't do anything at this moment. Ji Yunchu sighed, "Help me sit aside and I will do it myself." Bai Muyu nodded. Ning Feng was already safe and sound, and all that was left was to wait for him to wake up. Lu Qingran breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. However, the next moment, he noticed Ji Yunchu's injuries, frowned, and gently put Ning Feng down. After handing it to Bai Yuxiu, he walked up to her and said, "Do you need help?" Ji Yunchu wanted to wave his hands and say no, but then he thought about it and remembered that the eldest son of the Lu family seemed to be a well-known doctor before he took over the Lu family, so he thought for a moment and nodded, "Okay, I'm doing this. I'm worried that I can't figure it out myself, thank you very much." Lu Qingran shook her head, lowered her head to check her injured arm, and said, "It's okay, you also saved Ah Feng." Ji Yunchu endured the pain and said, "It's different. Xiao Shi is the younger brother I've seen since childhood. It's natural to save him. Similarly, you are Ah Feng's sister, so it's natural for me to save you. End of this chapter.